Florence, Italy, 1943. The Allied bombs are falling on the city. The streets are empty. The windows are dark. Every person with any sense is hiding. In a small apartment bedroom, a woman is hunched over a microscope. On the table beside her, a dozen chicken eggs, a set of sewing needles she has borrowed from her mother's sewing kit, and a notebook filled with observations she has been making for 3 years, in secret, in hiding, in a country that has declared her less than human. Outside, the bombs fall. Inside, she adjusts the needle, leans closer to the lens, and keeps working. Her name was Rita Levi-Montalcini, and the science she was doing in that bedroom, with borrowed needles and black market eggs while fascists hunted her people in the streets below, would one day win the Nobel Prize. This is the story of a woman they tried to erase from science, and what happened when science refused to let her go. Turin, Italy, 1909. Rita Levi-Montalcini was born into a cultured, prosperous Jewish family in a city that believed in education, in progress, in the future. Her father, Adamo, was an engineer and a mathematician. He was also a man of his time, which meant he believed genuinely and without malice that too much education would damage a woman's chances of becoming a good wife. He told Rita this directly. She was a teenager when she understood with absolute clarity that she disagreed. She wanted to study medicine, not nursing, medicine, not support, science itself, the kind of work that changes what humanity knows about itself. Her father resisted, Rita persisted, and eventually, because she was Rita Levi-Montalcini and persistence was her first language, he relented. She enrolled at the University of Turin School of Medicine in 1930. She was 21 years old. She was exceptional from the first year. Her mentor was Giuseppe Leovi, no relation, one of the finest neurohistologists in Europe. Under him, she began studying the nervous system, the architecture of neurons, the question of how nerve cells develop, differentiate, grow. It was the question that would define her life. And then came 1938. Mussolini signed the racial laws. Overnight, not gradually, not with warning, but overnight, Jewish Italians were stripped of their university positions, their professional licenses, their right to practice medicine, to teach, to publish, to work. Rita Levi-Montalcini, 29 years old, at the beginning of what should have been one of the most important scientific careers of the century, was told to leave. She did not leave. She went to Brussels for a time to continue working at a neurology institute. When the Germans invaded Belgium in 1940, she came back to Italy, to Turin, to her family. Her colleagues urged her to emigrate, to go to America, to England, to anywhere that would still let her work openly. She refused. Italy was her country. Science was her work. And if they would not let her into the laboratory, she would build one herself. She went home. She cleared space in her bedroom. She ordered chicken eggs from a local farm. She borrowed her mother's finest sewing needles. And she began. They took her lab, so she built one in her bedroom. Picture what this actually looked like. A bedroom in a Turin apartment, 1940. A microscope on a writing desk. Fertilized chicken eggs, the closest available model for studying vertebrate nervous system development, arranged carefully, temperature controlled as best she could manage. Sewing needles sharpened to a point fine enough for microsurgery. And Rita, alone, performing experiments with a precision that would have been extraordinary in a fully equipped university laboratory. She was not in a university laboratory. She was in her childhood bedroom under a government that wanted her to disappear. She kept meticulous notes. She kept asking the question that had occupied her since her years under Giuseppe Levi. How do nerve fibers know where to grow? What guides them? What calls them forward? In 1941, the Allied bombing of Turin began. The family moved to a country house outside the city, a small cottage, fewer rooms, less space. Rita packed the microscope. She packed the needles. She found a new source of fertilized eggs. She set up the bedroom laboratory again. The bombs followed them. The family moved again, this time to Florence, under false identities. Jewish identity hidden, names changed, papers forged. They lived as Catholic refugees in a city that did not know who they were. And in Florence, in another bedroom, in another temporary home, Rita Levi-Montalcini set up the microscope one more time. This is the detail that stops me every time I think about it. Not just that she continued working, but the conditions under which she continued: no university, no colleagues, no funding, no professional recognition, a government that had classified her as subhuman, a war that had made the most basic supplies nearly impossible to obtain. And she is there in a borrowed bedroom with borrowed needles, keeping notebooks that she had no guarantee anyone would ever read, because the science mattered and she refused to pretend otherwise. The war ended in 1945. Rita Levi-Montalcini emerged from hiding. She had spent the final months of the war working as a volunteer physician treating refugees, her medical degree finally desperately useful, even if the government that had stripped it had not yet been defeated. In 1947, a letter arrived from Washington University in St. Louis, Missouri. Victor Hamburger, an embryologist she had published work alongside despite everything, had read her wartime research. He invited her to join his laboratory for what was described as a temporary visit of a few months. She arrived in St. Louis in 1947. She would not return to Italy permanently for decades. And in that laboratory, with proper equipment and real resources for the first time in her professional life, the question she had been asking since Turin, what guides nerve fibers, what calls them forward, began to yield its answer. She began working with mouse tumors, specifically tumors that seemed to cause unusual and extraordinary nerve growth in nearby tissue. The fibers were growing toward the tumor. Something was calling them. Something was being secreted by those cells, something the nerve fibers could detect and follow. She named it, tentatively at first, then with growing certainty, nerve growth factor, NGF, a protein, a chemical signal, a messenger that the body uses to tell nerve cells where to grow, how to survive, when to branch and reach and connect. It sounds, in a summary, like a single discovery. It was not a single discovery. It was 15 years of obsessive, meticulous, often contested work. Experiments in tissue culture, a decisive year in Rio de Janeiro, working with a biochemist named Stanley Cohen, who helped identify and isolate the protein itself. Arguments with colleagues who doubted, rejections from journals, the steady, grinding resistance of an establishment that had many reasons, not all of them scientific, to be skeptical of her. She kept going because she always kept going. What nerve growth factor turned out to be was not just a curiosity of tumor biology. It was a fundamental key to understanding how the nervous system develops, how neurons survive or die, how the brain organizes itself. It opened pathways of research into Alzheimer's disease, into Parkinson's, into the mechanisms of pain, into the possibility of nerve regeneration after injury. The woman who had studied chicken eggs with sewing needles in a wartime bedroom had found something that would reshape neuroscience for generations. She waited a long time for the world to agree with her. The scientific establishment is not, it must be said, a place that moves quickly toward acknowledgement, and the scientific establishment of the mid-20th century was not, it must also be said, a place that moved quickly toward acknowledging women. For decades, the significance of NGF was disputed, minimized, set aside. The work was real, the evidence accumulated, and still the recognition did not come. It came in 1986. Rita Levi-Montalcini was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, jointly with Stanley Cohen, for the discovery of nerve growth factor. She was 77 years old. 77. She had been doing the work that won that prize since she was 31 in a bedroom in Turin with her mother's sewing needles. She received the Nobel Prize with the same composure she had brought to everything else. No bitterness about the decades of dismissal, no performance of vindication, just the calm of a person who had known for a long time that the work was right and had simply waited for everyone else to catch up. She said afterward that she was almost surprised, not because she doubted the discovery, she had never doubted the discovery, but because she had learned over a very long career not to expect that correctness and recognition would arrive together. She returned to Italy. She was received as a national hero, which she was. The Italian Republic appointed her senator for life in 2001, one of the highest honors the state can bestow. She took the appointment with absolute seriousness. Here is where her story becomes, for some people, complicated. Rita Levi-Montalcini continued voting in the Italian Senate past the age of 100. She was still casting votes at 101, 102. Her critics, and there were critics, said this was symbolic at best, irresponsible at worst, that a woman of her age could not possibly engage with the full complexity of modern legislation, that it was performance rather than governance. Rita Levi-Montalcini's response to this, paraphrased, she had earned the position. She had read the legislation. She had cast her vote according to her conscience. And the people who suggested she was too old to participate in civic life were, she implied, making a very familiar kind of argument. She had heard versions of it before, from her father, from Mussolini, from the colleagues who dismissed her wartime research, from the establishment that took 40 years to give her the Nobel Prize. The argument was always the same. You don't belong here. The answer was always the same, too. She was also, in the last decades of her life, deeply committed to a project larger than her own science. The Rita Levi-Montalcini Foundation, which she established and funded, worked to provide education for girls in sub-Saharan Africa, because she understood, with the specific understanding of someone who had been told she could not be educated, that the most dangerous thing a society can do is tell its women that knowledge is not for them. She lived to 103 years old. She died in Rome in December 2012. She had outlived Mussolini by 67 years. She had outlived the colleagues who dismissed her by decades. She had outlived the racial laws, the bombs, the laboratory that was taken from her, the establishment that made her wait until she was 77 for a prize her 31-year-old self had already earned. She outlived her oppressors, she outlived her doubters, and she died one of the most decorated scientists in the history of the world. What Rita Levi-Montalcini left behind is not a complicated legacy. It is, unusually, for a life this large, almost entirely clean. She left nerve growth factor, a discovery that continues to drive research into neurological disease, into Alzheimer's, into Parkinson's, into the regenerative possibilities of the human nervous system. Science built on her foundation every year. It still does. She left the foundation bearing her name, still funding education for girls in Africa today, still operating on the principle that the most important thing you can give a young woman is the tools to think. She left a model of persistence so extreme it borders on the inhuman, and yet she insisted it was simply the logical response to having something worth doing. She once said, "Above all, don't fear difficult moments. The best comes from them." She was not speaking philosophically. She was speaking from a bedroom in wartime Florence with borrowed needles and black market eggs in a country that had told her she did not exist. The difficult moment was her entire career, and she was right about what came from it. A woman banned from science by fascists, who built a laboratory from sewing needles and chicken eggs, who continued working while bombs fell outside her window, who waited 46 years for a Nobel Prize she had earned at 31, who then went to the Senate and voted until she was 102 because she had not survived all of that to stay home and be quiet. What would you have done in her place? I'm not asking rhetorically. I genuinely want to know, because I've sat with this story for a long time, and I still don't know if I would have had the specific, stubborn, almost unreasonable courage to keep setting up that microscope one more time. Drop your answer in the comments, and if someone in your life needs to hear this story, a daughter, a student, a friend who has been told she doesn't belong somewhere, share it with them. Because Rita Levi-Montalcini spent her life proving that the people who tell you that you don't belong are almost always wrong. And she had the Nobel Prize to prove it. I'm Irene, and I'll see you in the next one.